improve the regulatory environment in the country so that it is not an impediment for business. It need not be an environment which is just favorable to business and not to other stakeholders, but it certainly should not be an impediment to business. So I'll talk more about that because that is the subject of the seminar. The second strategy is to make the most, to improve the utilization and make the most of the human assets of this country. And in that I want to put very clearly, and let me say this, that it's not merely about the labor laws. It's also about good industrial relations. It's also about developing the capacity of our people, the skilling, and also the capacity of good management of industrial enterprises. All four together will enable us to realize the value of the biggest asset, maybe in terms of numbers, the only comparative asset our country has, which is the numbers of people. So rather than they being a problem to manufacturing, as many of our industrialists claim they must be the asset. And for that, there are four combined actions, which I've named, which will enable us to get the best value out of the human assets of this country and to make them a competitive advantage. The third strategy is our MSME sector. It is a sector which gets much neglected when we have our formulations of policy at the high level, because we do speak to the big industrialists and hear their views. What about the many, many millions of smaller companies who are contributing, as it is, 45% of our, or 40% of our manufacturing output and 45% of our exports? They are the backbone of industry in any country, Germany, of course, and here too. But they get neglected in the making of policy and the shaping of an environment which will enable them to be much more competitive and to grow much faster than they're able to under the present environment. So we have a set of strategies, a set of actions, tactics you may call them immediately, to improve the ability of our small-scale sector to grow and to be, as I said, the partner in hand or even the backbone with the big industries for growth of manufacturing. The fourth strategy is to get right our policies with respect to trade, with respect to enabling, extracting more production in the country rather than imports of manufactured goods in the country. The imbalance in our trade is growing quite alarmingly in the last 5 years. Just in manufacturing, the deficit, that means imports exceeding exports, was just $5 billion. Last year, it was already $45 billion. So while we talk about the gold, which will probably disappear once there's confidence, I mean the desire to invest in gold, confidence in the economy, but this needs a more fundamental, longer-term attention. And so various policies with regard to various matters need to be coordinated for the country to get a real strategy to grow the manufacturing base. So that's a policy-making requirement, a strategy for policy-making. And the fifth one, and by the way, the first four that I mentioned to you, the business regulatory environment, the human asset development, the focus on clusters and the small-scale industry in their clusters, and the fourth, which is policy with respect to industry and trade, have nothing to do with land. And the fifth one, which is the National Manufacturing Investment Zones, does require land, and it's a very attractive strategy. And everyone believes that the manufacturing policy and the plan is about National Manufacturing Investment Zones. If I were to take, before I started saying this, asking people, well, how many people believe that the National Manufacturing Policy is the National Manufacturing Investment Zones, I'm sure that 80-90% of the hands would go up. Because as I said, even cabinet ministers who I've polled in the last few days believe that's what it is. And therefore they say that unless we solve the land problem of the country, we cannot grow manufacturing. And I say no. To grow manufacturing across the country with small industries in various parts, the National Manufacturing Investment Zones cannot do it. And they will be a very substantial contribution to the manufacturing base of the country, but the first natural manufacturing investment zones are going to be ready to have investments, companies in them earliest in 2019, and that's just too far away when we're looking for jobs for people much sooner out of manufacturing, also to improve the trade in manufacturing. So ladies and gentlemen, there are 5 strategies, and the very first one is the business regulatory environment improvement. Now, we've had many reports, and we'll continue to have many reports to say what should be done to improve the business regulatory environment. I would say that the principal one, which is part of the 12th five-year plan, an outcome of it, is a one which is concentrated towards action to improve the business regulatory environment, and that is the one which is in the manufacturing plan, in the 12th plan. And again, very few people read it, and therefore they commissioned yet another report, and yet another report, and we've had one from the recent one by the committee led by Mr. Damodaran, of which I was also a part, incidentally. So I've been noticing that whenever we say, oh, there's a big thing, big problem, for which we're not getting results, we'll have another committee, another report. But the problem, as was mentioned by Mr. Couturier, is that we don't implement what we say we need to do. So the special need in India is to convert reports to results. When we have no results, like I say, we need another report and we get another committee, and there's one more waiting to be converted to results. Whereas we started formulating the 12th plan and began to ask people consultations very wide this time, much wider than we've ever done before by an order of magnitude. The summary of what people asked us was, please, in fact, don't make another plan, just implement the plans we already have. And someone said it very beautifully. He said, we don't want any more foundation stones, we just want finishing stones. The themes running through the paper, where I'm pretty impressed with, Rajat, what you are going to be discussing in the technical session, and hopefully you carry this on further. Let me say what they are. It says, strategy and key recommendations. I know you've got it on your table before you. Is number 1, follow up over previous administrative and regulatory reform endeavors. Just follow up and get them done. Number 2, systematization of business regulatory governance. And I'll come back to this. Systematization of regulations and governance. Then there is something about the e-business mission mode project, which is probably the only one which didn't fit into the set of things I want to talk about. The 4th one is regulatory impact assessment. The 5th one is making business more responsible towards society. A very intriguing one put in over here. We're talking about more voluntary action by business, and therefore perhaps less regulation of them necessary. Next one is developing an ongoing process of stakeholder consultation. And last one, the 7th, capacity building for carrying out regulatory reforms. So there is a theme running through this set of points that you make that we should be discussing, and I want to bring them up, what that theme is. Systematic governance, consultation, okay, voluntary action, but regulation. You mentioned, Rajat, at the outset, 3 things, and I noted the words. You said weak architecture of governance. You, of course, said poor implementation, and I've talked about that. And the third, you also said about a process of continuous consultation. And I'm saying it's continuous consultation. You also said this country is heterogeneous, right? So that's my context. I find that there is an incongruence, a mismatch between the theory in use that's guiding action towards regulation in India, and I would just say very briefly, shortly, in terms of global issues, including environment and trade. A mismatch between the theory in use guiding action in these matters and the state to which the global system has evolved, as well as the Indian system. Globalization, a word that has been used and perhaps overused in the last 10 to 15 years, comes down to a phenomenon in which we say that we've got to connect many parts of the globe together. But as we connect them together, how shall it all be governed together? We have right now happening in the United Nations in New York a governance mechanism which is based on the principle one nation, one vote. It could be a tiny nation, an island with a few thousand people, but it will have one vote equal to the one of India and China and the United States and Germany. Now, is this a good idea? But people keep saying, no, this is perhaps not such a good idea. But I want to remind you that democracy itself is based on the very same idea, that each living being is one vote. It doesn't matter how rich and big you are, each person, the person with no dollar in the pocket and the person with $100 billion, as some have in their wealth, is equal in their vote. So how would you govern such a system? How would you govern such a system? Going further for India now, the transformation of India, the evolution of India. India, since the 90s, has in its industry and manufacturing evolved, and we say thank goodness, into a system in which private actors are many more and they have the right to take their private actions and not to be told what to do as they used to be until that time. So many ships floating around, some very small ones, the micro ones, some big ones, all have a right to decide what they will do for their destiny. We have in India, and I'm pleased to be here in Bengal therefore, a situation where the states are saying we cannot be taken for granted as it might have been. And the Chief Minister of Bengal is the leader in saying this, and rightfully so. If you want good governance, what people's constitutional rights are must be respected. The person who has a constitutional right to one vote and the state which has a constitutional right to govern itself, you cannot take us for granted. We need to be consulted. But in that consultation, people say there's such a cacophony. How do we make sense of all of this? What are we going to decide to do together? What are we going to decide to do together? So the conditions in which regulations are required in the world, like I said, in matters of environment or trade, and the conditions under which India must be governed and must have regulations are quite different to the theory, appropriate for the theory that we have, that they should be, if we need control, we must have a controller. If we want coordination, there must be a coordinator. But what we really need is a system which is able to control itself, a system which is able to coordinate itself. It doesn't need a big boss to do it, because then the question always will come, but who's this big boss? And do we democratically accept this big boss rights to tell us all what we each should do? And this is happening in the global sphere, it will happen in the national sphere, it can happen at all levels of the system, where you got the philosophy, the policy, that the heterogeneity, the diversity, the rights of all must be respected. So I want to come to the architecture of systems, and I want to put that before you, and Rajat, this may be something that I can't say too much of in the short time that you've given me, but I hope that people who are discussing the subject of regulations will take this up as a point of inquiry into how do we get better architectures for governance, better systems of regulation. There are three classes of systems. I'm going to perhaps in some way simplify it in this short time. Three classes of systems. One are engineered systems. The second are chaotic systems. And sometimes we fear that India have shifted from an engineered top-down control system into a chaotic system. But fortunately, there's a third class of systems which sits in between them, which are complex, self-adaptive systems. They're called in short CSAS. Now this, I'm saying there's a science already developing of systems in the last 25 years. So if we want to be people discussing regulation of systems, like India is a complex system, I think we should look through that inquiry. We should become people who are systems architects and not merely regulation architects. Come back to, very quickly, before I explain what the principles of a complex self-adaptive systems are, I wanted to say, and because that's important to say, that in the 12th plan, since we've taken the business regulatory environment as one of the 5, perhaps the most important of the 5 subjects, to improve the ability of small and large enterprises to be more productive and thereby be all attracting more investments into the country from within and from outside, the framework that was developed in the 12th plan by the working group, which I chaired myself along with the Secretary of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, discovered that looking around the world and our own conditions, that the system of regulatory impact analysis, which is something that you touched upon, is a system that we can use. It's a method that we could use in our states. Most of our improvement in regulations, 80%, whatever matter you choose, whether it's the matter to do with setting up a business or getting the permission to use the building, the matter to do with even implementing of labor regulations or environmental regulations, is in the states. So here's one situation where it's in the hands of the states to improve their business regulatory environment, not waiting for the center to improve something in terms of national laws. 80% of the improvement can be done by the states. And some states are doing it already by using methods like the one I'm suggesting, the business regulatory impact analysis. So we are offering from the center, from the Planning Commission, this tool to the states. Please use it, and you will improve the attractiveness of your state for investments in the state. You will improve the productivity and the profits of the enterprises already in the states by something which, as I said, requires no money, no budget from the government, and no land. It's tuning up the business regulatory apparatus in the states. Okay, so let's come back again to the big subject about the architectures of systems, the classes of systems, complex, the self-adaptive systems. Very briefly, these systems operate on 4 principles. The first principle is they maintain permeable boundaries between parts of the system. To maintain permeable boundaries between parts of the system, you create lateral links between the parts of the system. So to coordinate is through lateral links that you coordinate rather than all going up to the top who tells each part what to do. So how do you improve the lateral links in the system is look to the left and right to your peers and say, what can we do together? Rather than, well, we have a problem of coordination, we're going to go up. And just so I illustrate it, I know this, having worked the last 4 years at the center in the government, that all the ministries will not coordinate laterally. They are in their silos. They will all take it up to the cabinet secretary, and today projects are going to the cabinet committee on investments. So that's all cluttered up now because it's overloaded with the needs to sort matters out. And so things don't get done. So lateral coordination, for which you need processes of consultation between stakeholders. And since this seminar is co-hosted by, or the whole process by the KAS with you, I must say the Germans have a very good way of stakeholder consultations between unions, between investors, that is producing companies, and between civil society increasingly as matters of environment come. So we have, from the Planning Commission, myself, with the help of the German embassy here, and the German government there, and the foundations, including yours there, studied, well, what is the nature of this process? What are simple methods and tools that we could learn to apply in India? Because we have in India the need to become smarter than the rest of the world at lateral coordination. We are larger, more heterogeneous, and need to move much faster than the rest. So one is lateral links and processes that enable lateral working. The second rule of complex self-adaptive systems is minimal critical rules. Don't make too many rules. You need rules, but once you get more than the few that you need, the rules start conflicting with each other. Okay, you remember the book Catch-22. Yeah, and this rule contradicts the other rule. And we in India are brilliant at the moment. because to solve the problem we want to create more rules. And then the rules clutter up some previous rules. So, the systems, that's the organizations that are applying these principles have realized that they must cut down the number. And Korea, in the early 2000s, when it recovered from the Asian crisis and said it needs to tune up its business regulatory environment, the president decreed that every ministry shall cut its rules by half within 1 year. Yes, and they did it, because the president said you do it, and did it. And there was a competition, those who wouldn't do it would be thrown out of the ministries, and the others would get it. Now, as they we've been consulting with them too, they said, what happened was, maybe not important rules were cut out, and that's how they achieved their targets. But that's what you want. If they weren't important rules, why did you have them as rules, interfering with the performance of the system? So that's how the useless things they cut out. So we, I think, need to have a target, and the government of Bengal, I suggest to you, have a target to say within the next year we're going to cut down the number of rules that are applied by something. That's going to induce people to think about what those rules are. And by the way, the business regulatory impact analysis process suggests just this. You have to consult the stakeholders and say, which of these rules are least important to all of us? And just drop these rules. So, minimal critical rules. The third is, you need a flexible resource architecture. Actually, for the complex system to be able to adapt, it needs diversity. So please don't have too much